One hook. He didn't notice when she stopped laughing at his jokes. Or when her texts got shorter, colder. He thought she was just tired. Busy, maybe overthinking again. But the truth is, she wasn't asking for more anymore. Because she had already given up. And the scariest part? She didn't leave him. She just stopped feeling anything at all. 2. Setup. Alara wasn't the kind of woman people noticed right away. She didn't demand attention, didn't fill the room with noise, didn't try to be unforgettable. But if you stayed long enough, you'd realize she remembered everything. The way you liked your coffee. The exact words you said on a random Tuesday night. The subtle shifts in your voice when something was wrong. And when she loved someone, she loved them quietly, but completely. Adrian met her during a time in his life when everything felt temporary. Jobs, cities, people, nothing ever stayed long enough to matter. He wasn't cold on purpose. He just never learned how to hold on to things without expecting them to leave. At first, Alara felt like something different. She listened in a way that made silence feel safe. She didn't push, didn't demand answers, didn't ask him to be more than what he was ready to give. And to Adrian, that felt easy. Too easy. Days turned into months, and their relationship settled into something unspoken. They weren't distant, but they weren't deeply connected either. It was a quiet in-between, where effort slowly becomes optional. Alara would send him long messages about her day. Little things most people would ignore. A song she heard on the way home. A stranger she smiled at. A thought that lingered too long in her mind. Adrian would read them. Sometimes hours later. Sometimes not at all. And when he replied, it was always just enough to keep things from breaking. But never enough to make them grow. Sounds nice. That's good. Yeah, I get it. 3 words, maybe 4. Never questions, never curiosity. At first, she told herself he was just busy. That love didn't always look the same. That maybe she was asking for too much. So she adjusted. She stopped sending paragraphs. And started sending sentences. Then those sentences became fragments. And eventually, silence. But it wasn't the kind of silence you notice right away. It didn't arrive all at once. It slipped in slowly, hiding between delayed replies, missed calls, and conversations that never really started. Adrian didn't question it. To him, nothing felt wrong. There were no arguments, no dramatic fights, no ultimatums, just less. Less laughter. Less sharing. Less of her. And because nothing broke loudly, he assumed nothing was breaking at all. What he didn't see was that Alara wasn't becoming distant. She was becoming used to being alone. Even when she was still with him. 3. Build. At first, the changes were so small they almost felt imaginary. Alara still replied to his messages. Still picked up his calls. Still said, "Good night," in that soft, familiar way. But something underneath it had shifted, quietly, almost carefully. Like she was learning how to exist without expecting anything back. She no longer waited for his texts. No longer checked her phone every few minutes, hoping to see his name light up the screen. Instead, she placed it face down, letting hours pass without noticing. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness anymore.
I needed to
It
tell
was
you the
release.
truth, Adrian.
She began filling her time differently.
I know.
Long walks alone, without telling him where she was going. Late night music playing through her headphones. Songs she never sent to him anymore. Moments that used to belong to them, slowly becoming just hers. And the strangest part? She felt lighter. Not happier, but less heavy. less like she was carrying something that refused to meet her halfway. When Adrian spoke, she listened.
I'm only gonna
She
say
always
this
had.
once.
But now,
Don't
she
go
no
any
longer
further, the
searched for
danger
meaning
is
behind
real.
his words. No longer tried to read between the lines, hoping to find something deeper. What he said was just what he said. Nothing more. Mira noticed it
You
first.
don't understand
You're
the gravity
quieter,
of this
she said
situation.
one afternoon, watching
Everything
Alara stir
depends
her
on
drink
what we do
absent-mindedly.
next.
Not the peaceful kind, the distant kind. Alara smiled, soft, almost convincing. I think I'm just tired. But Mira didn't believe her. Because she had seen this before. Not in Alara. But in people who had already started letting go, long before they ever walked away. Meanwhile, Adrian remained exactly the same. Same routine. Same half-present conversations. Same assumption that everything was fine, because nothing was visibly wrong. He still called her, baby. Still sent the occasional message. Still believed that consistency meant care. And in his mind,
have to do
it
this.
did. Because he never learned that love doesn't disappear
There's
all
no
at
other
once.
way.
It fades in the spaces where effort used to be. One night, he told her about something that had gone wrong at work. Frustrated, distracted, expecting her to respond the way she always did. With patience, with softness, with that quiet understanding that made him feel heard. She listened. She really did. But this time, when he finished, there was a pause. Not a heavy one. Not uncomfortable. Just empty. Then she said, I'm sure you'll figure it out. Simple, calm, polite. The kind of response you give someone you care about. But not someone you feel deeply connected to anymore. Adrian didn't notice the difference. Not really. Because the words were still kind. Still supportive. But what he didn't hear was everything that was missing. No follow-up questions. No emotional pull. No reaching. Just distance, wrapped in gentleness. And that was how Alara changed. Not through confrontation. Not through tears. But through quiet detachment. Built slowly, moment by moment. Every time she realized she was the only one still trying to feel something real. For conflict. Mira didn't wait for things to fall apart. She never believed in that kind of patience. The kind that watches someone slowly disappear and calls it giving them space. One evening, she found Adrian alone. No distractions, no easy exits. She's not okay, Mira said, her voice calm, but firm enough to cut through his indifference. Adrian barely looked up. What do you mean? It wasn't defensive. It was genuine confusion. And somehow, that made it worse. Mira studied him for a moment, as if deciding whether it was even worth explaining something he should have already seen. She doesn't talk about you anymore. Adrian let out a small breath, almost amused. She's always been quiet. Mira shook her head. No, she's always been patient. That's not the same thing. He didn't respond. So she continued. She used to wait for you. You know that, right? Wait for your messages. Your calls. Your attention. A pause. She doesn't do that anymore. Adrian frowned slightly, finally looking at her. She still texts me. Yeah, Mira said softly. But she doesn't reach for you. That word lingered. Reach. It sounded small. Insignificant, even. But something about it unsettled him. You're overthinking it, he replied, leaning back. She's just comfortable now. That's how relationships work. Mira almost laughed. Not because it was funny. But because it was exactly what she expected him to say. No, she said quietly. That's how relationships die. The room fell still. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but resistance. The kind that comes from hearing something you're not ready to accept. You're making it sound worse than it is, he insisted. We're fine. We don't fight. There's no problem. Mira stepped closer, her voice lowering. That's the problem. He looked at her again, this time longer, searching for something, anything, that would make her words easier to dismiss. But she didn't look uncertain. She didn't look emotional. She looked sure. She's disappearing right in front of you, Mira continued. And you think it's peace? Adrian exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. She hasn't said anything. If something was wrong, she would tell me. Myra's expression softened, but not in comfort. In understanding. No, she said. She used to. That landed differently. Not loud. Not dramatic. But heavy enough to stay. For a moment, Adrian didn't have a response. Because somewhere, quietly, he realized. He couldn't remember the last time Alara had told him how she felt. Not really. Not deeply. Not honestly. And instead of questioning that, he had accepted it. Assumed it meant everything was okay. Mira took a step back, giving him space, not out of kindness, but because she had already said what needed to be said. I'm not telling you this to start a fight, she added. I'm telling you because by the time you notice it on your own. She paused. It might already be too late. Adrian didn't answer. Not because he disagreed, but because for the first time, he wasn't entirely sure that he did. 5. Truth. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It never does. It came back to Adrian in fragments. Quiet moments that suddenly felt louder than they should have. The way Alara used to look at him. Like he was something worth understanding. The way she listened. Not just to his words, but to the pauses between them. The way she stayed. Even when he gave her reasons not to. He used to think that kind of love was natural. Effortless. Like it would always be there, no matter how little he gave in return. But now, when he tried to remember the last time she looked at him that way, he couldn't. And that absence, that blank space in his memory, felt heavier than any argument they never had. He started noticing things he had ignored before. How she no longer waited for him to finish speaking before checking her phone. How her replies came quicker now, but meant less. How her eyes, once soft, searching, full of something unspoken, now simply passed over him, like he was part of the background. There was no anger in her. No frustration. No disappointment. And somehow, that was the most unsettling part. Because anger meant she still cared. Disappointment meant she still expected something. But this was nothing. And nothing is where love goes to die. Adrian tried to trace it back. To find the exact moment everything shifted. But there wasn't one. No single mistake. No defining argument. No clear turning point he could point to and say, "That's when I lost her." Instead, it was a collection of smaller moments. So small they barely registered at the time. Every delayed reply. Every half-hearted response. Every time he chose distraction over presence. Every time she reached. And he didn't reach back. He remembered the long messages she used to send. Paragraphs filled with thoughts, feelings, tiny details of her day. He used to skim them. Sometimes ignore them. Sometimes respond hours later with something short, convenient enough. He thought she would understand. Because she always did. Until she didn't. Until those paragraphs became sentences. Then fragments. Then silence. And he had mistaken that silence for peace. That was the truth. Alara didn't change because she wanted to. She changed because she had to. Because loving someone who doesn't see you eventually teaches you how to disappear. Not physically, not all at once, but emotionally, quietly. She didn't wake up one day and decide to stop loving him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even conscious. It was gradual, like turning down the volume on something that once filled the entire room. A little less each day. Until one day, there was nothing left to hear. And the hardest part? Adrian had been there for all of it. Every step, every shift, every silent goodbye. He just never realized. He was watching her fall out of love with him in real time. 6 twist. It didn't hit him all at once. There was no dramatic moment, no sudden collapse of everything he thought they were. It was something smaller, quieter. One evening, Adrian called her. Not out of habit this time, but intention. For the first time in a long while. He actually wanted to hear her voice. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Then she picked up. "Hey," she said. Same voice.
I never
same
meant to
softness.
hurt anyone.
But something about it
I
felt
just wanted
distant.
to be free.
Like it was coming from a place he no longer had access to. He hesitated for a second. Thrown off by a feeling he couldn't quite name. "Hey, I was thinking maybe we could meet tonight," he said. "Just us. It's been a while." A pause. Not long. But long enough to feel unfamiliar. "I can't tonight," she replied gently. "I already have plans." That wasn't unusual. People had plans. But Alara used to be available. Not because she had nothing else, but because she always made space for him. "Oh, okay," he said, trying to sound casual. "Maybe tomorrow?" Another pause. Softer this time. More certain. "I think I'm busy tomorrow too." Something tightened in his chest. Not pain. Not yet. Just discomfort. Like something was shifting out of place. "All right," he said, forcing a small laugh. "Then when are you free?" This time, she didn't answer right away. And when she did, her voice didn't carry hesitation. It carried clarity. "I'm not sure, Adrian. Not I don't know my schedule. Not I'll check and let you know. Just, I'm not sure." And for the first time, he understood what that really meant. She wasn't unsure about her time. She was unsure about him. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was final. Adrian swallowed, trying to recover something, anything, familiar between them.
"I'll miss you."
"Did I do something wrong?" he
I
asked
love you.
quietly.
Remember that.
It was a
Goodbye.
simple question. One he should have asked a long time ago. On the other end, Alara exhaled softly. "No," she said. And she meant it. Because there wasn't one thing. There wasn't a single moment she could point to. "You didn't do anything wrong." That should have been a relief. But it wasn't. Because what she said next was the thing he wasn't ready to hear. "You just didn't do anything at all." No accusation. No anger. Just truth. And somehow, that made it heavier. Adrian closed his eyes for a moment. Every memory suddenly rearranging itself in his mind. Not as harmless habits, but as missed chances. "I didn't realize," he started. "I know," she interrupted gently. "Of course he didn't. That was the point." Another silence. But this one was different. It didn't feel like something waiting to be filled. It felt like something that had already ended. "I tried, you know," she added softly. For a long time. He didn't speak. Because now, he could finally see it. Not through her words, but through everything she had already stopped doing. "I just got tired of being the only one who felt anything," she continued. Still calm. Still steady. And that calmness, That absence of emotional weight was what broke him the most. Because she wasn't fighting for them anymore. She wasn't even mourning it. She had already gone through that part, alone. "So what are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely holding together. There was a pause. And then, the quietest answer. "I'm saying, I don't feel the same anymore." No dramatic goodbye. No tears. Just a simple truth. Delivered too late. And in that moment, Adrian finally understood something he had spent months ignoring. She didn't change to hurt him. She changed because she had already learned how to live without him. 7 ending. After that call, nothing felt urgent anymore. No messages to send. No explanations left to give. Adrian sat there for a long time, phone still in his hand. As if something might change if he just waited long enough. But nothing did. Because for Alara, everything had already changed long before this moment. The next few days felt unfamiliar. Not because she was gone, but because she had already been gone. And he was only now learning how to notice the absence. No more quiet check-ins. No more thoughtful messages waiting for him at the end of the day. No more feeling like someone, somewhere, was choosing him, even when he wasn't choosing them back. And that was the part that stayed with him. Not the loss of her presence, but the realization that he had once been deeply loved, and treated it like something that would always be there. He thought about reaching out again, saying something different this time. Something honest, something real. But every version of it felt like it belonged to a past she had already walked away from. Because love, when ignored long enough, doesn't disappear loudly. It fades, until it no longer recognizes the person it used to belong to. And maybe that was the hardest truth to accept. He didn't lose her when she said she was done. He lost her in all the moments he chose not to show up. When she was still there. Still trying. Still hoping. Now, she wasn't angry. She wasn't hurt. She was simply free. And Adrian, for the first time, understood what it meant to be too late. If this story felt a little too real, maybe it's because you've lived a part of it. Subscribe to Hidden Angle Podcast, where we tell the stories people feel, but rarely say out loud. Because sometimes, the quietest emotions are the ones that stay with you the longest.